Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm UTC President and CEO Rusty Williams, and thank you for joining us today on this special edition of the UTC podcast that we're calling C-Suite Conversations. In these episodes, I welcome industry executives from some of our associate member organizations into my virtual office, and we're going to discuss topics like leadership strategies, challenges they see, successes they've had. But we'll also offer listeners valuable insights on everything from navigating career paths to driving innovation. And through those episodes, we hope to deliver thought-provoking discussions, some actionable advice, industry knowledge, and insight that will be valuable to the members and listeners to this podcast. And for this episode, I'm happy to welcome, as our guest, Ryan Gerbrandt of Anterix. Ryan is the Chief Operating Officer there at Anterix, and in that role, he oversees Anterix's sales, product development, marketing, operations, technology, and engineering efforts, basically everything that's important at Anterix. Prior to Anterix, though, Ryan spent 13 years at Trilliant, where he pioneered their smart grid, smart city, and industrial IoT efforts. And early in his career, he worked at Manitoba Hydro in the communications and control systems area. Ryan attended both Red River College and the University of Manitoba, where he got degrees in communications technology and utility management. Ryan, it's great to have you with us today on this special episode of the UTC podcast.
Rusty, my pleasure. I didn't realize it was a special episode. That makes me feel honored.
There you go.
But grateful as always to the entire UTC family. We love our relationship and the collaboration we've had through the years, and just delighted to be able to join you here for this podcast coming up on the end of the year.
Yeah, it'd be great, and I appreciate it myself. And we'll get into that relationship a little bit later in our conversation, but I too appreciate Anterix's involvement with UTC. Now, we make then assumptions a lot of time that people understand, what goes on, who is who, and all that. And I don't want to do that for this conversation. So if you will, for those that may not know who Anterix is or the business they're in and some of the history, can you give us just a little bit of who is Anterix and kind of what happened to get it started?
I'd be happy to. I hope we've been doing our job and people have a understanding of kind of what Anterix is. But certainly for those who don't, are new to this story. So Anterix, I'd describe it as an energy technology company. And at the heart of what we do, though, is enabling utility wireless broadband networks. And how we got there, was through our founders. A lot of folks probably who have covered the telecom side will remember Nextel, push to talk, walkie-talkies, absolute innovators, kind of bringing the first digital networks to the market. And Morgan O'Brien, one of the founders of Nextel, was the founder of Anterix, and sought out an opportunity to really bring to market a very unique and scarce asset in the very wireless airwaves that modern networks are built around, called spectrum. And, around that spectrum, we've really made it our mission, as a technology company, to help ensure that, the participation of all of the critical ecosystem partners, the utilities, are all part of that conversation along with us. It's because I'm sure that we're going to talk about it's really the foundation of a lot of aspects of the utility journey when you start breaking it apart, and just how critical communications and data flow and control systems are when we think about all the things that are in front of us, right, Rusty, in terms of the aspects about grid modernization and reliability and cybersecurity. I mean, there's so many places that you can kind of track that all back to, these critical and necessary communication systems that help open up a lot of those opportunities and make us more agile as an industry as we get prepared for modern technology. And so Anterix is proud, kind of to be in that position, to help facilitate some of those conversations. And, through relationships like here, Rusty, with you and UTC, that I think it helps us build that voice and build participation from all of the utility and the technology company membership that's so critical to make this stuff work.
Yeah, and if you know it, or if some of the other people that may be listening, my career started. You started at Manitoba Hydro in the actual utility in the comm space. I was at Southern Company when we did, in early in my career, and kind of worked through that same kind of career progression. But one of the opportunities I had at Southern was I was on the initial project team for Southern Link, where we were building out, the IDEN network, much like the
Right. Yeah.
Nextel original network was written or designed and installed. And so that provided a little different perspective for myself. Again, we were, the number two, digital network that was built at the time, and I had the opportunity. Well, I crossed paths with Morgan O'Brien a couple of times. He wouldn't, know me from anybody today, but we had to. But having that experience provides an interesting perspective for this industry. When we come fast forward 25, 30 years and go, wow, this is a different world today. And as you think about, your business model and the different landscape that exists, say at the FCC, and
Yep.
how spectrum is actually managed and allocated, I mean, how is that? How has Morgan or Anterix or the group itself kind of molded the market where it is today and created this business opportunity that didn't exist 25 years ago?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's fascinating when you kind of look back, kind of the dynamics that have played, kind of in just the evolution, I mean, I think of spectrum as kind of like digital real estate, right? That's the best way
Hmm.
my brain works, to think about it is, I think as a society, we better probably appreciate kind of the value and the importance and the differences between chunks of geography, right? If you're a property developer, your ability to secure your little piece of real estate, right, your acreage or whatever it is absolutely critical, kind of when you're building your vertical infrastructure up on top of it. And frankly, I think what the FCC, kind of recognized, as really the governor, of the controller of, kind of how spectrum gets utilized and monetized, was how critically important spectrum was going to be, in the journey, of kind of modern evolution of society and technology and all of that. And kind of auction authority was established back in the 90s. I think kind of to your point, which was kind of the first step in the recognition of just how critical these assets were going to be, and we're attempting at the point, to try to find mechanisms that
Right.
were more fair and accessible and stuff like that to a broader set of groups. But pivot that forward, to kind of the role that we saw and what Morgan identified, frankly, is with anything, and I think spectrum policy is not that different. The evolution of those systems needs to keep up the modern technology, right? And frankly, that's where we kind of came in, with the identification, again, recognizing how scarce these spectrum assets were, particularly, Rusty, as you know, when you get into what's called low band spectrum, so below 1 GHz, right? Which
Hmm.
for us building kind of as utilities, building massive scale, kind of large geographical networks, no different what you did with Southern Link. That's ideal. I call it beachfront property in the spectrum world, right? That's
Right.
what you need to economically build foundational networks. You try to do that at mid-band or kind of upper 4, 5, 6 GHz spectrum. That's a tough go, to try to build a large scale network that way. But really, what we found through this kind of this policy activity was the ability to work with the FCC, with the industry, to really reclassify what was a legacy utilization of the spectrum narrowband channels, for generally applications and use cases that the technology had kind of moved on from, right, and kind of moved on to broadband based technologies in the form of LTE, 4G, kind of forward path to 5G type systems.
Hmm.
And the outcome of that process, was really to get the band ready to accept modern technologies. And then we made it our mission really to utilize our capabilities and our experience in that spectrum world to keep this spectrum focused on the utility market, which I think all of us that have been around for a while, Rusty, have recognized just how challenging it's been historically for utilities to participate, kind of in the process of securing spectrum. And I think our focus and hopefully our dedication to help this industry, has been something that helps bring this most critical asset to the table so that we can start evolving and innovating what the future landscape is going to be for utilities.
Yeah. And speaking of the utility, the application side of this, we talk, you explained that very well. about some of that evolution from a spectrum management, an FCC, a wireless carrier perspective. And yeah, you described it. I call it beachfront property is what I call it, right? There's
There
only so
you
much of
go.
it. And the most valuable piece of it goes first, right? And attracts the most attention. And then you start kind of working your way to the edges or away
Yeah.
from the water and all that. And it's a very close analogy here when you think about it from spectrum ownership as well. But not only has the wireless piece of this, the spectrum piece changed. When we come back and look at the electric utility piece of this, it too has changed. Again, when I first started at Southern, I was actually a distribution engineer. So I was, again, this was 100 years ago, before the automation and before, a lot of things a lot of the tools that are available today. But I was able to kind of learn the business there. But things over that period of time really changed because when I first came in, and you look at the history looking backwards, like 30 years ago, the business had not changed a whole lot.
Hmm.
Right? It was, you got poles and wires, and you have standards and processes, and we don't want to do anything to jeopardize the reliability of the grid, which was the primary purpose, right? But as we go forward, say 10 to 20 years, we were looking at an industry that was in a decline. Actually,
Right.
the electric demand forecasts were, single digit declines annually. But something happened, 10 years ago, about 5 years ago, that flipped that switch. And now we've gone from not only, wanting to do, as good as we've done in the past, we've got to do more. We all live at home, we all work in our offices, and we're dependent on power. We're dependent on the ability to communicate. And nobody ever wants that to not only not go off, but not to even blink or degrade in any way. So, when we think about the delivery of the utility services, let's talk a little bit about how this change in technology, what you described from Anterix business model, but kind of the technology in general that supports this delivery of utility services. I
Yeah.
mean, kind of what role do you see Anterix playing, and how does that kind of play out in the industry in your mind or in your company's mind?
Absolutely. But you're right. I mean, kind of the dynamics that lived when you and I kind of came into the space, versus now are dramatically different, right? In so many different areas. And here's how I think about it, though, is just envision for a minute, kind of what the net impacts are of some of these changes, right? So, and we'll just pick a couple for examples. The transition to clean, just to pick one, right, which is kind of one of those macro conversion
Right.
forces which we have to do by society. That drives a far more dynamic grid, right? From what you and I grew up on, one-way power flows. We all knew where the generating station was. We all knew where the load center was, right? And electrons like water, they flowed one way, right? That was just, kind of how it worked.
That's right.
When you start painting the picture, though, of kind of aspects of the clean energy grid, I think we pretty readily get to a point where you have a far more distributed, kind of multi-directional, far more complicated architecture for what the actual electrical power system needs to look like, right? Now, marry that with, what's another good example? Let's go to the consumer side. You touched on that one. I think that's a good one too. The consumer today versus 20 years ago, I'd argue, is far more demanding than we were,
Mhm.
right, back 20,
Right.
25 years ago, for good reason. I mean, the share of wallet to the energy bill is significantly higher, than it was in the past. I would say our expectations and needs as society to electricity is far higher than it was before, right? We started with light bulbs, which I'd argue were very, very important, but now it's everything, Rusty, right? It's like,
Yeah.
gosh, when you think about the things that, are power enabled, in our home or in our lives, from our computers to our smartphones to our social device. I mean, whatever it is, you can't paint a more holistic landscape of, the reliance when we go turn that switch on in the morning or we go, get the coffee maker running. I mean, it's just so fundamental. And so I think with that has come the demands and the needs for utility direct engagement, far more hands-on with their customers, right? And being proactive in terms of how they help that customer potentially manage their energy. We've been talking about, kind of demand management programs or energy efficient programs or just kind of bill awareness programs. Those are all technology enabled, right? There's data and analytics and perhaps AI, that become part of
Hmm.
the technology stack to make all of that stuff happen. And then you've got kind of the extreme on the other side. I'll go to just to round it out, kind of electrification of all industry, right? So the very car that's now pulling into our garage is dependent, on this electricity supply. And
Yep.
oh, by the way, in accumulation, it's actually as big of a load base as everything else is, right? In the grid combined that we got to be thinking about. So I think about it from that perspective. First, just macro, all of these different things. And I try to find common denominators. This is how my brain works, Rusty. My engineering brain from old school is what's common about these things as an industry and a society that we can invest in, that we can leverage off of, that can create flexibility and agility. And what all of those things have in common, is just how real time they're going to be, right? Digital, and connected, all of those different assets. And the smarter we are as an energy community and the utility themselves to be able to understand in real time, have situational awareness about all of those different assets and the dynamics surrounding them, the more resilient we're going to be, the more agile we're going to be, the more capable and flexible we're going to be as an industry. And when I think broadband, what we're talking about here, what Anterix is trying to do, I absolutely see it as an innovation engine, with just like the internet was, right? That when we
Right.
built the internet, nobody had an idea that we are going to be driving e-commerce, ordering food, Ubers, whatever it is. That's an innovation outcome, right? By having that kind of capability, there's like wicked smart companies out there, that can figure out, wow, if I have that kind of communication or that kind of data access, I can unlock new innovative business models. And that excites me about kind of what I think broadband's doing for the energy industry, where I've kind of drawn the analogy before. Like I feel like we're building the internet for utilities, just like we built it for residential and consumers, some 30 years ago now. And the ability to unlock everything that's going to come from it. But it's fun, right? I think this is an exciting time, in the industry. It's cutting edge, mission critical, super cool technology starting to come in, and it's exciting to see telecom kind of playing a role, right at the heart of the intersection of it all.
Yeah. And I've joked through the years, half joked, half, truth telling, that back in those days, 25, 30 years ago, when you're in the comms department in the utilities like you were in Manitoba, like I was at Alabama Power, you were in the background. Even you
Oh,
just kind of did your thing. Nobody knew you existed, and you could just sort of enjoy that kind of career. But it's gone full the opposite direction now, to where all these people that are working on these types of networks, because of what you just described, are in the critical path of the not only of being successful with what you do, but the corporation now, from an electric
yep.
generation delivery perspective, you're in the critical path of that. When you
I
think
couldn't
about,
agree. And here's just an example that Rusty
yeah,
is kind of just playing this evolution because you couldn't be more right. I remember back when I was at Manitoba Hydro. I mean, it was an important role. Everybody knew it, but it was way below the waterline, right?
mhm,
Nobody, when you got higher up in the organization, would really recognize it. Even since I've seen the journey here at Anterix, though, the referenceability and the understanding at the CEO's level, the CFO level, the CTO level is nothing that I've ever seen before in my career. In this time, who
yes,
completely identify with how important and critical these foundational communication systems are for all the reasons that we talked about, right? And that's pretty cool, to kind of when I'm thinking of kind of our constituents and the people that we've grown up with, to see the telecom people in the utilities getting the recognition and kind of the mission critical outcomes that they drive up at that level of awareness and priority. I love that. I
yeah.
think that's where I probably should have been all the time, but
I agree. I
wow.
agree. But we're there now, and I see that as a great thing and not a bad thing.
Yeah.
We think about this growth of these new technologies from a consumer perspective. Right? We had no idea what one of these was, right, until the first one came out, and then we started leveraging it, like you said. We've got smart watches, and we've got all these things, right, from a consumer perspective that makes our lives a little easier. Um, when we think about that, looking, future wise from a critical infrastructure, broadband network perspective, what kind of technology do you see, or what kind of areas do you think the evolution of technology might kind of play out for this industry?
Yeah, I mean, crystal ball, right? A little bit. I think about it this way, and kind of in sections. Just the technology, just the telecom technology kind of train that we're on now has its own exciting roadmap, right? One of the benefits of getting on this broadband technology that we're getting onto, I call it sometimes kind of, I feel like what we're doing here collectively is like this unification of mega sectors, right? For the first time, that
Hmm.
we're not reinventing communication technology this go around. We're actually drafting on, multi-billion dollar R&D funnels, that are building world-class technology, starting with us as consumers. But that's pretty cool. I mean, that means we're tapping into a robust supply chain, a large, kind of global commerce base that sets the future for us as, and we can see it play out in front of us as consumers. I mean, there's no reason as mission critical, kind of industry, we're going to be the bleeding edge, in terms of what's necessary on the telecommunications side. That 5G, 6G, kind of whatever those advancements are, we can watch them mature. And I think that's pretty exciting, that we can kind of
Hmm.
see that play out in real life. And when the economic scale gets there, kind of when the testing and the bulletproofing of the technology all plays out, we can bring it into our roadmap, for future longevity. And so that's what I see as kind of how we move forward from just the communication side of the world. I think what's going to be the most exciting though is what happens now, in the utility application side is to start thinking about the advent of, we talk a lot about AI from a data center perspective right now, just because of how significant it is on the load, right? I think the opportunity is going to be equally interesting in terms of the efficiencies and the other application and, kind of outcomes that come through the use of AI, right? I think we often forget that kind of behind that big data center is going to be a massive consumer base. There's people using that GPU power to do super cool stuff, right? That's going to
Right.
probably transform the way that, we think about and use and consume and, maximize efficiencies and stuff like that. And I think it's a pretty immediate interface to what we're talking about with communications is that we've heard about kind of the application at the edge, right? Starting to bring AI compute horsepower closer out to the edge of the grid, where a lot of the dynamics play out.
Right.
Uh, and I think seeing that move forward and bring AI into that architecture and then really smart people figuring out how to use it is going to be an area that we see grow pretty dynamically, in the future. And I think it's necessary, right? When you come back to the hallmarks that we talked about earlier, the complexity, I think, drives the necessity for some level of automation. I just don't believe a human is going to be capable, of kind of dealing with all the complexity. I don't think they're going to go away. I'm not in that camp. I think a human to manage and take the feedback, from perhaps these AIs or these sensor systems is going to be still mission critical forever. But it'll help make them all more efficient, right? More reliable, and kind of process more data at the real time.
Yeah, and that's one example I use when people ask me about AI in the utility space. Just with utility system infrastructure monitoring, when you look at it today, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, millions of data points that can be collected from to understand the health and status of the electric grid, particularly from a distribution perspective. I mean, every meter on the side of the house nowadays, or almost every meter, can communicate, and all the other smart devices and street lights and everything else. When things start happening and all those devices start communicating, you've got all this data. I mean, yeah, we are, the humans have a critical part in this, but we have a finite computing capability. And how can we make sense out of all that data and be able to go, okay, well, here's what's going on, or here's a location, or here's a situation, and actually from a proactive perspective, let's figure that out before it actually becomes a problem.
Right.
You start seeing some of these little small nuances going on in the electric network or the water gas network that can raise a flag to keep it from becoming a problem when we get, when we start seeing those kind of things happen. It's, we don't know what we don't know. That's the great thing about technology. And we think, again, I'm old, I understand that, but I think back about Star Trek, things that you saw on TV, 50 years ago, or the Jetsons cartoons, some of those things where, it took guesses at future technology. Guess what? A lot of those things are coming
Yep.
about, right? I mean, the Dick Tracy watch, right? The communicators and all this kind of stuff. You never know. But as we work together as an industry, then we help shape that from a policy perspective and from a technology perspective. And I think that's what's cool about being in this job at UTC, is being able to provide a platform to bring different people together, different groups together, to work together, for the betterment of the industry. That may sound noble on my part, but that's really part of the challenge, or part of the calling for an organization like UTC is, what's best for this industry. And as you mentioned early on in our conversation, Anterix has been a big supporter of UTC's, throughout its existence, and we have worked together. There's been issues that our advocacy and policymaking team has worked with the team at Anterix and others across the industry to try to figure out what's best for the organization. And dealing in Washington is a rewarding and somewhat frustrating experience, but we keep continuing to kind of chip away at that wall. But when you think about this collaboration idea across industry, I mean, what kind of value do you see there? Or maybe what value does Anterix place on the ability to be able to collaborate like that?
Oh, I couldn't agree more with everything that you said, Rusty. It's as center to what we do as anything, honestly, right? I put it right up there, with, we love what we're doing with technology and all the things that Anterix is doing on the spectrum side, but without collaboration, and that's the utilities, right? And so, we're working with now, as already 7 utility partners that are in deployment, 15 states. They learn so much so fast, right? Kind of everybody that goes through the journey is uncovering different experiences, different lessons learned, different efficiencies. And frankly, one of the things that's most exciting and always has been about this industry is the fact that we're so non-competitive, from the actual utility side, and that we can, have conversations, within any other industry. There's no way, right? They're all competing for their market share or whatever it is. But we can get all these utilities in a room in these forums and have open conversations about what we're learning. I'll say, Rusty, on the flip side too, even looking at how modern technology is coming together, is very different than it was 10 to 15 years ago. When you look at most things that we bought in the utility industry 10 to 15 years ago, most of it was, I describe it as vertically integrated solutions, right? So I'd work with one company who had a piece of software, maybe a networking technology, maybe a sensor device or something on the other end. That's not largely how it works anymore. Kind of there's best in class players at different layers, of the technology stack, that are fantastic, brilliant software, AI, analytics, whatever it is. They need to have a robust ecosystem of players that can help them get the sensors out there, get the communication system in place, and really put in class kind of integrated world-class solutions. And so recognizing all of that is kind of what got us kickstarted in the first place, of creating what we call now the Anterix Active Ecosystem Program. And I think there's 115, 120 companies that are part of that now. And that's driving the technology side collaboration, right? Let's get the best and smartest in a room as often as possible to brainstorm on how do we collectively drive innovation that meets the needs of the utilities, right? And create really a virtuous cycle of innovation, where the utilities are helping to tell us what they need. We've got technology partners helping us meet that need, and build products and stuff like that. Because it's paramount. I just see that collaboration and kind of that ability to talk together and share experiences. These are big challenges in front of us to come back to where we started, right? And it's that kind of brain power, and rapid, kind of acceleration through pilots and testing, and all the rigor that a utility market has to go through. We got to be efficient, right? We got to try to move that forward as positively as we can.
Virtuous cycle of innovation. I like that.
There you
I like
go.
that phrase. I like that phrase. Yeah, you're right. I mean, and I've always valued collaboration and working together, in the industry throughout my career. But being in a position like this, you see the value of that. And individually we're good, but together, it's 1 + 1 = 3.
Right.
The cases as opposed to 2. Well, our time's about up, Ryan, and I appreciate you being here. It's a great conversation today. Exactly what we were wanting to accomplish with this series of podcasts. And I just want to thank you for taking the time and spending it with me and having the conversation for folks to listen to. But also thank you for the support that Anterix has given to UTC throughout its existence, and I look forward to that continuing into the future.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Rusty. I'm grateful. I love having these conversations with thought leaders like yourself. It's always fun. And it was great to get this message out there, and also equally appreciative of the relationship with UTC. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that'll do it for this particular C-suite conversation. I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast and look for future episodes. I hope everyone has a great day.